Imagine a time when the whispers of the land grew louder than any voice, a time when young men and women began to take secret vows to reclaim what was theirs. After the Second World War, young Gikuyu, Embu, and Meru men returned home. They had fought for the British Empire across the globe, learning strategy, discipline, and the power of organized force. They expected to be rewarded with justice, with fair land distribution, and with freedom. Instead, they found the same old injustices waiting for them. The reserves were overcrowded, crushing taxes burdened the poor, and the most fertile lands were still held by white settlers. The colonial administration, brought up by co-opted traditional leaders, offered no hope. In this climate of frustration, the Mau Mau movement began to take shape. The name itself was shrouded in mystery. Some say it came from Kikuyu war cries. Others believe it was a code for the forest oaths that defined their struggle. What was undeniable was its foundation in oaths, sacred spiritual pledges that bound members to secrecy, loyalty, and the fight to reclaim their ancestral land. These ceremonies were held deep in the forests of Mount Kenya, the Aberdare Ranges, and the Kikuyu Escarpment. Under the cover of night and mist, initiates would swear vows, binding themselves not just to the struggle for land, but to the death of betrayal. Breaking an oath was a fate worse than death itself, is spiritual exile. These rituals were steeped in ancestral traditions, drawing on the language of the forest and the reverence for their god, Ngai. From these sacred forests, charismatic and skilled military leaders emerged. Darren Kimoti, a former soldier, became the central strategist, organizing units and inspiring unwavering loyalty. Woru Huaitot, known as General China, was a master of guerrilla tactics, training recruits in ambushes and intelligence gathering. Stanley Mathange, a fearless commander, coordinated attacks across the Aberdare Ranges. Together with other field marshals and cell leaders, they built a clandestine communication network that snaked through villages and forests, using hidden signals and couriers to move messages and supplies. The forests were not just a refuge, they became their headquarters. Hidden shelters, weapon caches, and training zones were carved out of the wilderness. The forests were their school of war. The resistance started small. Young Mau Mau cadres would cut fences on settler farms, letting livestock roam free and destroy crops. They poisoned or killed the cattle that symbolized colonial wealth. They launched attacks on isolated police posts and government outposts in villages like Githunguri, Kihara, and Limuru, burning the buildings of loyalist chiefs and collaborators. Support for the Mau Mau was widespread among ordinary villagers. Despite the severe risks, families secretly provided food, information, and shelter. The dream of reclaiming their stolen land and restoring ancestral honor was stronger than their fear. Women were vital to the cause, serving as messengers, spies, and sometimes even taking part in sabotage themselves. Meanwhile, the British were growing uneasy. Political groups like the Kikuyu Central Association, led by figures like Jomo Kenyatta, were still pushing for peaceful reforms, but their pleas were falling on deaf ears. To the colonial authorities, the Mau Mau was a shadowy threat, still hidden in the forests and among the youth. By 1950, the movement had developed a secretive but hierarchical structure. Local cells reported to field commanders, who coordinated with the central forest leadership. Their goal was both symbolic and practical: to reclaim land, punish collaborators, and assert their moral authority over a people crushed by injustice. The stage was set. The forests were alive with whispered plans, and every oath taken in the misty shadows carried the weight of vengeance, justice, and ancestral duty. The British administration, now fully alarmed by the secret oath-taking, declared a state of emergency on October 20, 1952. They believed swift, ruthless action would crush the rebellion. Instead, they ignited a full-scale war. Operation Jock Scott began immediately. That very night, British forces raided villages across Kiambu, Murang'a, Nairi, and Embu. Thousands were arrested without trial. Prominent leaders like Jomo Kenyatta, Bildad Kagia, and Fred Kubari were thrown into Lang'ata prison in Nairobi, held in solitary confinement. The British thought that by cutting off the head of the political leadership, the body of the rebellion would wither. They were wrong. In the forests, Mau Mau fighters intensified their operations. Small, mobile units launched ambushes on police patrols, burned loyalist homesteads, and sabotaged settler farms. Secret camps deep within Mount Kenya and the Aberdares became bustling training grounds. The British response was brutal and systematic. They imposed a pass system, forcing every Gikuyu, Embu, and Meru adult to carry identification detailing their every move. To be caught without a pass meant arrest, forced labor, or detention. Entire villages suspected of harboring Mau Mau sympathizers were villagized, uprooted and forced into fortified camps surrounded by barbed wire, where their food, work, and movement were strictly controlled. A network of detention camps Lang'ata, Monyoni, Hola became infamous for their horrific conditions. Men, women, and even children were separated, subjected to torture for information and used as forced labor. Yet, these camps became centers of both fear and resistance. Prisoners shared information and maintained their secret oaths, keeping the spirit of the Mau Mau alive even behind barbed wire. The fighters in the forest continued their guerrilla war, striking settlers and loyalists with poison, traps, and night raids. British patrols were constantly attacked along the roads near Githunguri, Kiambu, and Limuru, forcing the colonial army to deploy helicopters and armored cars. But the Mau Mau had the ultimate advantage: intimate knowledge of the terrain. Leadership remained decentralized but coordinated. Dedan Kimathi, operating from Mount Kenya, ran training programs and intelligence networks. Wuru Huaitot, in the Aberdares, led daring sabotage missions. Stanley Mathange coordinated units across different forest zones, maintaining a lifeline of communication with village supporters. The social fabric of the highlands was torn apart. Families were divided. Loyalist villagers faced retaliation, while suspected Mau Mau supporters were imprisoned or killed. Yet, support for the movement persisted, fueled by a shared suffering and the burning desire to reclaim what was stolen. In 1954, the British launched Operation Anvil, a massive sweep of Nairobi that saw tens of thousands of suspected supporters rounded up and sent to detention camps. But the forests remained out of their reach. The Mau Mau fighters adapted, becoming more ruthless and disciplined. Battles were brutal. The British had superior firepower, but the Mau Mau had the land, psychological warfare, and the unwavering will of the people on their side. By 1956, the rebellion was contained in some areas, but it was far from defeated. The spirit of Mau Mau was alive in the forests, in the camps, and in the heart of every child who had witnessed the humiliation of their people. In the years that followed, the British intensified their forest campaigns, determined to hunt down the remaining leaders. The Royal Air Force began systematic bombing raids over Mount Kenya and the Aberdares, trying to flush out the fighters. Ground patrols, reinforced with African troops from the King's African Rifles and Loyalist Home Guards, pushed deeper into the forests than ever before. Life for the Mau Mau became a desperate struggle for survival. Food was scarce, ammunition was running low, and the constant threat of betrayal hung in the air. Yet, they fought on. The forest, once their sanctuary, was now a trap. The turning point came with the capture of key leaders. In 1956, Wuruhuaitut, General China, was captured after being wounded. His interrogation provided the British with invaluable intelligence. A few months later, the biggest prize of all was taken. Dedan Kimoti, the heart and soul of the rebellion, was captured in the forest near Nairi. His trial and subsequent execution in 1957 was a massive blow to the movement's morale. With its central leadership gone, the organized resistance began to crumble. Isolated bands of fighters continued their struggle, but the war was effectively over. The human cost was staggering. While official figures remain disputed, it's estimated that tens of thousands of Africans were killed. Many more were held in the brutal detention camps, and over 1 million people were forced into the fortified villages. The psychological scars ran deep, creating divisions within the Gikuyu community that would last for generations. The British had won the military war, but they had lost the political one. The sheer brutality of their response had shocked the world and turned public opinion in Britain against colonial rule. The Mau Mau rebellion had exposed the ugly reality of empire and proved that Africans would fight and die for their freedom. The struggle paved the way for Kenya's independence. In 1963, Jomo Kenyatta, the man the British had imprisoned as the leader of the rebellion, became the first Prime Minister and then President of a free Kenya. The Mau Mau veterans, however, were largely forgotten. They were not celebrated as heroes but were often marginalized, denied the land they had fought for. Their story is a complex and often painful one, a testament to the brutal fight for freedom and the enduring quest for justice. The Mau Mau uprising was more than a rebellion. It was the violent birth of a nation. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for more stories from history.